everyone, comic book reviewer here. This time reviewing on the film Furry Vengeance. Now, as you know, Furry Vengeance is meant to be a 2010 family comedy film that was meant to have Brendan Fraser in the starring role. And the best way I would describe Furry Vengeance is like, what if we did something a lot different with the great outdoors, use the whole raccoon scene and did something else with the story. So the premise of the film is meant to follow Dan Sanders, who is meant to be a real estate developer, and we kind of see how in the small additional area of Rocky Springs, we kind of see how he has to kind of make sure the whole development goes ahead. We kind of see how he has to keep to a tight schedule, and it's kind of clear that Dan doesn't think how his wife, as well as their son, think about this move, and it's clear that Dan is more sort of focused on his job than thinking about the people and those around him. And we kind of see how the animals around Dan slowly go after him, and we do kind of see how Dan slowly learns that his boss, Lyman, is pretty much using questionable methods, and we kind of see how Dan learns that there's more truths about Rocky Springs than there is. And I think the best way I would describe how the film is trying to handle the message is about not only about respecting nature, but also environmental responsibility. As the whole point of the film is how, yeah, you gotta treat nature with respect. You also gotta kind of stop and think how your actions might not only affect the people around you, but as well as the animals. And the whole point about the environmental responsibility is that you do see how Dan, as well as his boss, slowly go for a path where Dan slowly kind of questions his actions when he slowly learns the truth. And you do see how his son Taylor does try to give him advice and point out the the reasons why Rocky Springs was a whole nature preserve to begin with. But you kind of get the sense that obviously Dan's boss, Neil, shows no concern about using questionable methods. He's more about making money and obviously pretends to be eco-friendly, hiding behind a mask to get what he wants. I think that the whole point of the film is obviously meant to be more like a more over-the-top version of the great outdoors. And the best way I can kind of describe Dan's character is being a lot like, yeah, Chester Ripley, played by John Candy. Like, they both kind of understand their mistakes. They both kind of do what's best for the family, but have to kind of learn things the hard way. And the best way I would kind of describe Ken Keon's character as Neil is obviously meant to be much like Roman. He's obviously meant to be a bit similar to Dan Aykroyd's character, being a bit of this smooth talker, being this guy who can get anything he wants, use questionable methods to manipulate others. I think the problem that the film suffers from is not really knowing to dial back on the humour and not knowing how to make it funny. I think it's got moments where it is serious and is telling an important message, but the rest of the film is trying to go too over the top with the whole animal attack stuff. I don't think Brendan Fraser was a bad choice for Dan, I just don't think really was the right fit. I think they should have gone with someone who could play this guy trying to figure things out, but understanding the whole consequences. I can understand at the time Brendan Fraser was coming to that point where his eye candiness was coming to an end, and obviously because of him now becoming less of that kind of iconic eye candy, he was now becoming more and more typecasted in comedy stuff, and this can happen to a lot of fading actors and actresses. I think to me is that Furry Vengeance isn't a great film, but it is a moment where it can hit the emotional levels. It knows it has to tell an important message about, yeah, environmental responsibility, respect for nature, but also pointing out that you might actually be the bad guy, but it's just realizing the consequences of it. So I think to me, Furry Vengeance definitely deserves thumbs in the middle. It's kind of okay, kind of alright, just handling something that clearly wasn't meant to be. So, comic book reviewer here, signing out.